Stowaway is hiding on the International Space Station. He isn't one of us. By Grupe Horror. I awoke to a distant tapping sound, which stopped a few minutes after I opened my eyes. Beneath that noise was the familiar reverberating hum I'd grown accustomed to, but the tapping sound was unsettling and new. The International Space Station was constantly filled with noise, the most prominent a droning hum reminiscent of being trapped inside a powerful vacuum cleaner. The blinds were closed, and darkness permeated every inch of my phone booth-sized living space. Blinking my eyes a few more times, I looked at the glowing face of my watch and saw it was still early, not yet 5 a.m. We operated on a 24-hour day, despite the fact we witnessed 16 sunrises in that span of time. If not for the simulated days, you'd lose your mind from perpetual jet lag. Our days began at 6 a.m. and finished at 9 p.m. The long shifts symbolic of the workload to be done in the short amount of time we each had aboard the ISS. Our days were broken down into 5-minute increments. Our schedules consisted mostly of experiments and associated documentation, meal times, video chats, and personal hygiene. Everything was meticulously scheduled into 5-minute chunks, even our bathroom breaks. Closing my eyes, I tried to go back to dreaming. My sleeping bag hovered in the air, held down by a strap so that it didn't float away in zero gravity, and so that it didn't bump into other people. With 10 crew members on board, real estate was at a premium. The space station was built for 6, but there have been as many as 13 people aboard at once. Every warm body brings a share of food, toiletries, and clothing, supplies which all take up precious space. Which is why it was so obvious to me when a stowaway insidiously came on board the ISS. Someone lurking in the shadows who was not supposed to be there. An 11th crew member unaccounted for. I would see them out of the corner of my eye, like a mirage in the desert, only for them to disappear a second later. Always just a glimpse, never right in front of me. The thing was clever and extremely good at disguising itself. Like an octopus, it blended with the colours of the walls and fit itself into vents and hiding places. This is all difficult to believe, I'm sure, but it's true. When I told the crew, I expected them to be incredulous. Instead, it sounded like everyone had quietly begun to notice the same things. Movement in the shadows, rustling sounds, and missing items. Food and water, clothing and other more personal items. At first we all thought it was a rogue crew member, a kleptomaniac cosmonaut with a penchant for taking too many rations and stealing dirty clothes. But after several crew meetings and weeks of careful observation, it became obvious that was not the case. None of us were stealing the supplies. We were sure of that much. The sound came again. With it, a knocking noise, like a creaking pipe releasing pressure on a cold night. Hairs stood up on the back of my neck as I listened to that noise reverberating throughout the cabin. It was familiar, but I couldn't place it. Getting out of my sleeping bag, I began to head towards that sound, floating out of the tranquility node and guiding myself from handhold to handhold in the darkness. The hygiene and sleeping quarters were quiet, aside from the occasional sound of snoring. The noise came again, and I tried to stay as silent as possible as I rounded the corner and went left. I continued to propel myself along through the American laboratory module, hovering past the expensive equipment and specimen containers. I wondered vaguely if the sound was coming from the Japanese lab. It seemed to be emanating from ahead and to the left, but no one was scheduled to be in there at this time. Opening the airlock door, I entered Kibo. The Japanese laboratory was empty, despite the sounds I had just heard coming from inside. Another noise from behind me now. I turned around, dripping sweat, which rolled off my temple in beads and floated upwards to the ceiling. My heart drumming madly in my chest, I put my feet against the wall to push myself off, like a swimmer in a pool of water. I began to float backwards towards the entrance of Kibo. Echoes could be funny in the ISS, and I told myself it was fine. The noise, whatever it was just coming from the European laboratory module, the Columbus. That was where it had been coming from all along. I had just misjudged the sound. So I began to float over that way, trying to ignore my anxiety and nerves, trying to forget about the voice in my head saying that none of this made sense. None of this was normal. What if someone woke up right now, I wondered. Would they suspect me of being the one stealing food and supplies? Quite possibly. I tried to think of what to say if anyone found me awake, and decided I would tell them I wanted to get in a bit of early exercise. This was reasonable, since we had to spend 2 hours per day working out in order to prevent muscle and bone loss, and to prevent fluid from seeping up into the subcutaneous tissue around our skulls. The space snuffles, we call them. Either way, despite what it might look like, I needed to see what was making that noise, and to find out if it had anything to do with our mystery stowaway. Suddenly, the tapping noise stopped, and instead there was a sound like fingernails scraping across a chalkboard, squealing louder and higher by the second. The sound retreated from beneath me, back the way I had come towards the tranquility node. I pulled myself as quickly as I could across node 2, where our life support systems and electrical equipment were. Beneath me, the sound like claws rending steel continued to scrape across the hull, beneath the space station, and I wondered what sort of damage was being done, and what could be causing such a horrifying sound. Others were beginning to wake up now, and I could see lights turning on in the tranquility node as I swam through the air in zero gravity, making my way through the US laboratory. As I did, I decided to take a look out through the observation window, trying to make out what was causing that horrifying sound. I hit the control switch, and the blinds covering the window beneath me opened up. Staring out through the glass, I saw the stars and the earth below us, but then I saw something else as well, much closer. One of my fellow crew members was out there, frozen in the vacuum of space. His shocked visage scraped past the window, making that sound like broken fingernails on a chalkboard. I can't say his name here, so I'll call him David. Some sort of black tentacle was wrapped around his throat and face. It was dark as the night sky, trailing off invisible into the distance like a huge black squid. The thing was dragging him away from the ship, causing that tapping sound and the scraping sound as his frozen corpse banged and dragged against the space station's hull. As I thought about this, the black tentacles dug spikes deeper into his blue-tinged neck, and he began to drift off, disappearing out of sight. A moment later, he was gone, like a bad nightmare I had just woken up from and wished only to forget. If only I could. "What are you looking at out there?" a voice asked from the other end of the US laboratory ahead of me. Another crew member had woken up from all the noise, I thought, and now I would have to somehow try and explain what I'd just seen. "It's David. He's..." Tears were welling up in my eyes, turning into floating bubbles, and I trailed off, unsure how to continue. Then I looked up to see the man who had just died outside in the freezing vacuum of space. David, right there in front of me. He was alive and well, hovering in front of me like a ghost. David? Yeah? What's wrong with you? And what was that noise, anyways? Did you find our stowaway? The smile on his face told me everything I needed to know. His skin seemed to shift and squirm, bulges appearing like large insects tunneling beneath the surface. But I had no time to confront him, as others began to emerge from the sleep quarters moments later, asking why we were up so early. I shook my head slowly, still not sure if I should believe my eyes. There was a sound, a tapping sound. The more I thought about it, the more it all seemed like a dream. Had I been asleep when I thought I was awake? Was it possible for one to sleepwalk in space? Or to sleep levitate? No. I shook that feeling off quickly. I knew what I had seen. Maybe we should call it in, find out if something happened, said David. If you're sure that's what you heard. I'm sure. Everyone agreed, and we notified Mission Control. They informed us after a full diagnostic check that all systems were operating normally. Only one strange thing had occurred overnight while we were all sleeping. The exit hatch used for our spacewalks had been opened by someone, then closed a moment later. Just long enough to toss somebody out, I guessed. Nobody admitted to it, leaving us all slightly uneasy. Oddly, though, afterwards, our rationing problems were solved. Food stopped going missing after that. We had just enough of everything for 10 people again, as if the invisible stowaway had suddenly disappeared. Or as if he'd gotten rid of someone else and taken their place. I can't prove anything, but I'll have to keep a very close eye on David when he gets back to Earth. I'm not sure what else I can do besides monitor him. Whatever he is, he's dangerous. And there might be more out there like him. Who knows? They might already be here, living among us. And there are more living up above in our atmosphere, like the one who took David. Body snatchers, skinwalkers, doppelgangers, whatever you want to call them. You've all heard about them before. The tales of them are endless, and you can read all about them if you look through these pages at the stories of others who have survived encounters with them. I get the feeling they're all one and the same, or that they're related somehow. So, keep your guard up. Don't be fooled. And most importantly, don't let them inside. By then, it's already too late. I just want to thank Grupe Horror for allowing me to narrate this story. As a lot of you probably already know, has a YouTube channel themselves, so if you haven't already subscribed to them, I'll leave a link in the description below so you can head on over and do so. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare.